Okay, so imagine you're finally on that trip abroad. The one you've been dreaming of.
Yeah.
You're in a market somewhere. The sights and smells are just incredible.
I love that.
And you want to ask about one of the local crafts.
Of course.
But how do you go beyond like the textbook phrases to really connect with the person you're talking to?
That's where mastering everyday English conversations, I think, becomes like your superpower.
Absolutely.
It's that secret weapon.
I love it. Secret weapon.
Yeah.
Because we're not talking about, sitting down and memorizing grammar rules.
Right.
We're talking about the kind of language that makes you sound like you belong.
Exactly. You sound natural.
Yes, exactly.
Like you're part of the in crowd.
Yeah. And so today we're going deep on this with excerpts from the Everyday English Conversations podcast.
Yes.
They're all about those skills that you need to speak confidently in real life situations.
Exactly. And we'll be unpacking why this kind of practice is so powerful.
Yeah.
And we're going to explore some common topics that you can use today. And we'll even share some ninja tips to make the most of your learning.
Okay, I love it. I'm ready to become a conversational ninja.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. Okay, so first let's unpack this. Why is practicing everyday conversations so important?
Yeah, it seems like it's really about going beyond that textbook knowledge.
It is.
Yeah.
I mean, think about it this way. Textbooks give you the building blocks, but everyday conversations
Yes.
are where you actually construct the house.
Right.
You're training your brain to think in English in real time
Yeah, in real time.
without overthinking every single word.
Without overthinking it.
So it's less about perfect grammar and more about keeping that conversation flowing naturally.
Precisely. And here's where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
Everyday English is full of idioms, slang, and cultural references
Right.
that textbooks often miss, and these elements that make your English sound really authentic
Yeah.
and help you connect on a deeper level.
That makes a lot of sense because, we've all had that experience of learning a language from a textbook.
Yep.
And then you get out into the real world and it's like, wait a minute, people aren't actually talking like that.
Exactly. It's a whole different ballgame.
Yeah. So, but, some people might feel intimidated. Like they might think, oh, I'm not ready for those complex conversations.
Yeah.
What would you say to them?
I would say start small.
Okay.
Everyday English isn't about launching into philosophical debates or anything like that.
Right.
It's about those tiny little interactions that make up your day.
Mm-hmm.
Ordering coffee, chatting about the weather, asking for directions.
Just those real basic things.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And each one of those little interactions is a chance to practice and build your confidence.
It's like building those fluency muscles one small interaction at a time.
I love that analogy, fluency muscles.
Fluency muscles, yeah.
That's perfect.
So are there specific types of everyday conversations that are especially helpful to practice?
Absolutely. The Everyday English Conversations podcast highlights a few really key areas.
Okay.
For example, greetings and small talk. These are crucial for breaking the ice and just setting a comfortable tone.
I can see that because sometimes just starting a conversation can be the hardest part.
It really can be just that initial, how do you even begin?
Exactly.
Then you have things like ordering food and drinks.
Yeah.
Now, this is incredibly practical, especially when you're traveling.
Mm-hmm.
You're using specific vocabulary. You're navigating a menu.
You're dealing with numbers.
Exactly. And even prices. It's a fantastic workout for your language skills.
It's a real world language quest
It is.
with delicious rewards at the end.
With delicious rewards at the end. Exactly.
I love that. Okay, so we've got greetings, we've got ordering. What about the classic talking of the weather?
Ah, yes, the weather.
Is there more to that than meets the eye?
There definitely is. It's a neutral topic that's universally relatable.
Uh-huh.
So it's perfect for striking up conversations with strangers.
Yeah.
Or filling those awkward silences.
True.
Plus, it exposes you to all these different ways of describing the same thing.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
So instead of just saying it's hot,
Right.
you could say it's sweltering or the heat is unbearable.
Exactly. Or even, it's a scorcher out there.
It adds color to your language.
It does. It makes it more vibrant.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
And then You have conversations about making plans.
Yes.
This helps you practice future tense, negotiate times and dates, and even navigate those social situations.
It's essential for building relationships and feeling comfortable in a new environment.
Absolutely. So we've got greetings, ordering weather talk, and making plans. That's a great foundation for everyday interactions.
It is a solid foundation.
Are there any other conversation topics that stand out to you as being like particularly helpful?
You know what's fascinating is that these core topics can branch out into so much more.
Okay.
So let's take ordering food, for instance. The podcast gives the example of using phrases like I'll have or could I get. These are simple variations, but they add variety to your speech.
Right.
But think about what comes after you order. You know, you might say, can I get that to go?
Or like, is there a place I can sit?
Precisely. And each interaction builds upon the last. And before you know it, you're piecing together longer, more complex conversations.
That's a great point. It's like starting with a single Lego brick.
Yes.
And building an entire world.
I love that.
But for someone who's maybe struggling with confidence, that can still feel overwhelming.
Sure.
What advice would you give to someone who's nervous about making mistakes?
That's such a common feeling, and the Everyday English Conversations podcast really emphasizes this. Making mistakes is part of the process.
Yeah.
In fact, it's essential for learning and improving.
Absolutely.
You have to make those mistakes to grow.
I've definitely been there.
Yeah.
I mean, learning a new language can be humbling.
Oh, it is. It's definitely a humbling experience.
Do you have any personal experience with that?
Oh, absolutely. There were so many times when I felt like I was talking in circles. But what helped me was remembering that even native speakers make mistakes sometimes.
You did?
It happens to everyone.
Yeah.
It's about the effort and the willingness to communicate, not about being perfect.
So it's about shifting your mindset from like a fear of making mistakes to like embracing those mistakes as opportunities to learn.
Exactly. And the more you practice, the more you'll realize that fluency isn't about speaking perfectly.
Yeah.
It's about being able to express yourself and connect with others, even if it's a little messy at first.
I love that it takes the pressure off and makes it more about the joy of communication.
It should be enjoyable.
Yes,
It
exactly.
shouldn't feel like a chore.
Okay, but how do you actually get to that point where you're comfortable speaking?
Right.
The podcast mentioned finding a language partner.
Yes. And this can be a game changer.
Yeah.
Having someone to practice with regularly, whether online or in person, provides invaluable experience. You can bounce ideas off each other, try out new phrases, and get feedback in a safe and supportive environment.
It's like having a built-in cheerleader
Exactly.
for your language journey.
Yes, your own personal language cheerleader.
But what if someone's too shy to talk to a stranger?
Right.
Are there other ways to practice?
There are definitely alternatives. You can immerse yourself in English content, like movies, TV shows, or podcasts.
Okay.
The key is to choose something that you actually enjoy.
Yeah.
That way it feels less like studying and more like entertainment.
Right.
So you're learning without even realizing it.
I've heard people talk about watching movies with and without subtitles as a learning technique.
Yes,
Is that something you recommend?
absolutely. Here's a strategy.
Okay.
Pick a movie that you love and watch it 3 times.
Okay.
First with subtitles in your native language.
Got it.
Second with English audio and your native language subtitles.
Okay.
This forces you to connect the spoken words with the written ones.
Yep. That makes sense.
And finally watch it without any subtitles.
Wow.
This challenges your brain to fully engage with the language.
That's a really clever approach. I'm definitely going to try that.
I highly recommend it.
And speaking of movies, I think it's time for us to switch gears and dive into some practical examples.
Yes, let's do it.
The Everyday English Conversations podcast had some great role plays, right?
They did. Those role plays are fantastic.
Yeah.
We can explore those scenarios and see how these phrases come alive in different contexts.
Perfect.
Okay, so let's jump into some of those real world situations.
Yeah.
Let's put these phrases into action.
Let's do it.
The podcast had a great example of ordering at a coffee shop,
Okay.
which can be a surprisingly tricky situation for language learners.
Oh, I know.
There are so many different types of coffee sizes, syrups.
Right.
It can feel overwhelming,
It could be a lot.
even in your native language.
Yeah.
And the pace can be fast, especially in a busy shop.
Oh, for sure.
So let's break down how you might navigate the situation.
Okay, let's do it. So let's say I'm the customer walking up to the counter.
Right.
What's a good way to start?
Well, you could keep it simple,
Okay.
and just say, "Hi there, can I get a latte, please?"
Okay, nice and straightforward.
Yeah.
But what if I want to customize it a bit?
Okay.
Like, what if I want a large latte with oat milk?
All right. So that's where those extra phrases come in handy.
Okay.
You could say, "Could I get a large latte with oat milk, please?"
Okay.
Or, "I'd like a large latte, and could I have that with oat milk?"
So there are different ways to structure the sentence
Yes,
and still get your point across.
exactly. And don't be afraid to use those clarifying questions.
Oh, right.
You could say, "Do you have oat milk?"
Uh-huh.
Or, "What sizes do you have?"
Okay, so you don't have to have the perfect phrase memorized beforehand.
No, not at all.
You can ask questions and clarify things as you go.
Exactly. The barista is there to help you.
Right.
And most people are patient and understanding, especially when they see you're making an effort.
That's good to remember. It takes some of the pressure off.
It does.
Now, what happens once you've ordered?
Okay.
Are there any key phrases to know for that part of the interaction?
Definitely, you probably want to confirm the price. So you could say, "That's all for me. How much is that?"
Right.
Or, "What do I owe you?"
Okay, and then let's say you want to pay with a card. Is there a specific way to say that?
Yeah, you could simply say, "I'll pay with card,"
Okay,
or "Can I use my card?"
easy enough. And what if they ask if you want to leave a tip? I know that could be a cultural difference in some countries.
You're right. Tipping etiquette varies widely.
Yeah.
If you're unsure, it's always a good idea to observe what others are doing
Okay.
or ask a local friend for advice.
Yeah, good point.
But if you do want a tip,
Yeah.
you could say, "Yes, please, can I add a tip?"
Uh-huh.
Or, "I'd like to leave a tip."
So many little details to think about.
There are.
But breaking it down like this makes it feel much more manageable.
Yeah, I think so too. And the more you practice these types of interactions,
Right.
the more natural they become.
It's like you said, building that fluency muscle memory.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've conquered the coffee shop.
We did it.
What about another common situation, like making small talk with a colleague at work?
That's a great one.
Mm-hmm.
The podcast highlighted a scenario where two colleagues are chatting at the water cooler.
Okay.
It's a classic example of how everyday English helps you navigate those informal social interactions
Uh-huh.
in a professional setting.
I can imagine that being a bit nerve-wracking,
Oh, yeah.
especially if you're in a new job or working in a different country.
It definitely can be. But remember, small talk is all about building rapport and creating a friendly atmosphere. It doesn't have to be deep or profound.
Just casual conversation.
Exactly. So how might you start a conversation like that?
I guess you could say something like, "Hey, how's it going?"
Yeah, that works perfectly.
Or "How's your day going so far?"
That's another good one. Simple and straightforward.
And what if they say, "Oh, it's been a busy day"? How would you respond to that?
You could empathize and say, "I hear you. It's been crazy here too."
Oh, okay.
Or you could ask a follow-up question like, "What have you been working on?"
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah, it keeps the conversation flowing and shows that you're interested.
In what they have to
And
say.
they could share a bit about your own day.
Exactly. But keep it brief and positive.
Right. You don't want to overload them with details.
No, it's a balance of being engaging and respecting their time.
Now, here's a key tip for sounding more natural in these kinds of conversations.
Oh, okay. I'm listening.
Pay attention to how native speakers use fillers.
Fillers.
Yeah, those little words and phrases we use to pause, think, or connect our thoughts?
Oh, I see what you mean.
Like things like, sort of.
Right.
I definitely use those.
We all do.
Sometimes I feel a little self-conscious about it, though.
I understand. But using them appropriately can actually make you sound more fluent.
Really?
Yeah. because it shows you're processing the language in real time,
Huh. I never thought about it like that.
just like a native speaker would.
So it's okay to use them.
In moderation, of course, you don't want to overuse them,
Right.
but sprinkling a few in here and there can make your speech sound less robotic
Yeah.
and more conversational. So it's about finding that sweet spot
Exactly.
between sounding natural and not being too hesitant.
Exactly. It's all part of developing your own personal speaking style.
This has been so helpful. It's amazing how breaking down these everyday conversations
Yeah.
reveals all these little nuances and strategies.
It is fascinating.
It feels less intimidating now.
I'm glad to hear that. And remember, the key to mastering these skills is practice.
Practice, practice, practice.
The more you put yourself out there, the more comfortable and confident you'll become.
Okay, so we've covered ordering coffee and making small talk with a colleague. What other real-life situations does the podcast explore?
Well, they actually delve into a scenario that many people find really challenging,
Oh, okay.
asking for directions.
Oh, yeah, that could be tricky.
It's a situation where you really need to understand the other person
Right.
and be able to respond clearly and concisely.
I can see how that would be tricky, especially if you're in a new place
Yeah.
and not familiar with the landmarks or street names.
Exactly. And sometimes accents or the speed of speech
Right.
can make it even harder to understand.
So let's say I'm a tourist and I need to get to the train station.
Okay.
How should I approach someone for directions?
First, make eye contact and smile.
Oak?
It shows you're friendly and approachable.
Good point.
Then you can start with a polite phrase like, "Excuse me, could you please help me?
Okay.
I'm trying to get to the train station."
Okay. That sounds good. And what if I don't understand their response right away?
Don't panic. It's perfectly acceptable to ask them to repeat or clarify.
Okay, good.
You could say, "Sorry, could you repeat that?"
Uh-huh.
Or could you speak a little slower, please?
Okay, those are good ones. It's so important to be able to ask for clarification
It is.
when you need it.
Absolutely. And don't be afraid to use gestures or point to things on a map if you have one.
Right.
Visual aids can be really helpful.
So it's about using all the tools at your disposal
Yes.
to communicate effectively.
Exactly. And remember, even if you make a few mistakes along the way, the most important thing is to keep trying and not let fear hold you back.
I love that it's about embracing the journey and the learning process.
Exactly. And with practice, you'll find that even these potentially stressful situations
Yeah.
become opportunities to grow your confidence and fluency.
Speaking of confidence, what about those situations where you want to express a stronger opinion
Okay.
or even disagree with someone politely?
That's a good one.
Does everyday English cover that too?
It absolutely does. Mastering those nuances is crucial
Yeah.
for navigating social and professional interactions effectively.
Okay.
The podcast gives the example of a conversation between friends who are making plans.
Oh, okay. I see. So, like, let's say I'm talking to a friend about what to do this weekend.
Yeah.
How can I express my preference without sounding too forceful?
You could start by acknowledging their suggestion
Okay.
and then expressing your own preference.
Got it.
For example, you could say, "That sounds fun, but I'd actually prefer to go to the park this weekend.
Uh-huh.
It's supposed to be beautiful weather."
So it's about finding that balance
Yes.
between being assertive and being respectful.
Exactly. And using phrases like "I'd prefer" or "I'm not really in the mood for"
Right.
helps soften the statement
Uh-huh.
and makes it clear that you're expressing a personal preference,
Yeah.
not rejecting their idea outright.
What about if you actually disagree with someone? How can you do that constructively in everyday English?
That's where using phrases like "I see your point, but," or "I understand what you're saying, however," can be really helpful. They allow you to acknowledge the other person's perspective
Right.
before presenting your own.
And that helps to keep the conversation respectful
Yes.
and avoid it turning into an argument.
Precisely. It's all about maintaining that balance.
Yeah.
And remembering that even in disagreements, the goal is to communicate effectively
Right.
and find common ground.
This is all such valuable advice.
Yeah.
I'm starting to see how mastering these everyday English conversations
Yeah.
can really empower you to navigate a wide range of social situations
It can.
with more confidence and fluency.
Exactly. And the beauty of it is that these skills are transferable to so many many different contexts.
That's true.
Whether you're traveling, working, or simply interacting with people in your daily life.
It's like having a secret language weapon.
It is.
That opens up a whole new world of possibilities.
I love that analogy.
And the best part is that anyone can learn these skills
Absolutely anyone.
with practice and dedication.
It's never too late to start your journey.
So as we wrap up this part of our deep dive,
Okay.
what are some key takeaways that our listeners can start using today?
Well, one of the biggest takeaways is that everyday English is all about putting yourself out there
Yeah.
and practicing those real life conversations.
Right.
Don't be afraid to make mistakes, ask for clarification, and use all the tools at your disposal to communicate effectively.
And remember, it's not about sounding perfect.
No, not at all.
It's about connecting with others
Yes.
and expressing yourself with confidence.
Exactly. And the more you practice, the more you'll realize that everyday English is less about textbook perfection and more about embracing the joy of communication.
It's like learning to dance.
Oh, I like that.
At first, you might feel awkward and unsure of your steps.
Yeah.
But the more you practice, the more fluid and confident you become.
I love that analogy. It captures the essence perfectly.
Everyday English is about finding your rhythm, expressing your unique style,
Yes.
and enjoying the process of connecting with others through language.
And just like dancing, it gets better and more enjoyable with time and practice.
Absolutely. So I guess that leads us to the final part of our deep dive.
Let's do it.
Okay, so we're back, and I feel like we've uncovered so much about everyday English conversations.
I think so too. It's been a really interesting exploration.
But, for someone who's out there listening and maybe feeling a little stuck or discouraged in their language learning journey, what advice would you give them?
That's a really great question. And I think the key is to remember that progress isn't always linear. Well, that's so true.
There will be days where you feel like you're just, acing it.
Yeah.
And then other days where you just stumble and feel frustrated.
Yeah, you feel like you've taken 10 steps back.
Exactly. And it's all part of the process.
It's like any skill you have to embrace those ups and downs.
Absolutely. And here's the thing. It's during those challenging moments that you learn the most.
No, that's a good point.
So instead of getting discouraged,
Yeah.
you try to reframe those experiences as opportunities for growth.
So it's about shifting your mindset from I'm failing to I'm learning.
Exactly. And remember, you're not alone in this journey.
Yeah.
There are so many resources available to help you.
That's true.
Online communities, language exchange apps, even just a supportive friend who's willing to practice with you.
Those are all great reminders because it's so easy to get caught up in that self-criticism.
It is.
But it's so important to celebrate the small wins and focus on the progress that you are making, even if it's not always like super visible. Absolutely. And here's a little secret. The more you focus on the joy of communicating and connecting with others, the less those mistakes are going to matter.
That's a really good point.
When you're genuinely engaged in a conversation, that pressure kind of melts away.
Yeah, you're not so worried about saying the perfect thing.
Exactly. And you'll find yourself speaking more naturally and more fluently.
So it's about finding that flow state where you're not overthinking every word, but you're just present in the moment.
Precisely. And here's a practical tip for achieving that flow state. Set small, achievable goals for yourself.
Correct.
Instead of aiming to be fluent overnight, focus on mastering maybe one specific phrase or conversation scenario each day.
Yeah, break it down into those smaller steps.
Exactly. It's amazing how those small steps add up over time.
It's like that saying, how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time?
I love that.
And it's not just about speaking, it's also about listening.
Oh, that's so important.
Pay attention to how native speakers use the language, the rhythm, the intonation, the pauses.
Those are all key elements.
Try to mimic those patterns in your own speech. It's like learning a dance. You observe the steps and then you practice them until they become second nature.
I love that analogy. It's so true.
And just like with dancing, the more you practice, the more confident and expressive you become.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to experiment and have fun with the language.
Yes.
Try out different accents, play with idioms, use humor.
Yeah, let your personality shine through.
Yes. Find your own unique voice.
I love that it's about embracing the creativity and playfulness of language.
This should be enjoyable.
It shouldn't feel like a chore.
Exactly. It should be something that energizes and inspires you.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into everyday English conversations, what are some final thoughts that you'd like to leave our listeners with?
Well, I think the most important thing to remember is that everyday English is a journey, not a destination.
That's beautiful.
It's about embracing those real life interactions, those little moments that make up our day.
It's those connections that make it all worthwhile.
Exactly. And the more we practice, the more we open ourselves up to those connections and those experiences that make life so rich and rewarding.
I couldn't have said it better myself. So to all our listeners out there, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into everyday English conversations. Remember, it's not about being perfect. It's about being present, engaging, and expressing yourself with confidence.
Absolutely. And the more you practice and embrace those real life conversations, the more fluent and confident you will become. So get out there, start talking, and enjoy the journey.